Hi, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Kelly Head. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a staff attorney at Assista. Thank you so much for joining us for the webinar on Confronting Anti-Blackness against Immigrant Survivors in Civil Legal Systems. Assista is co-presenting today's webinar with our partners at Ujima, Inc., the National Center on Violence Against Women in the Black Community. Going to turn it over to my co-presenters to introduce themselves. Ayana, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited about this conversation today. My name is Ayana Wallace-View, pronouns she, her, and I'm one of the training and technical assistance managers with the team. Millicent?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Millicent Shaw-Phibbs. I'm the legal director here at Ujima, so I run the OVW grants. I'll pass it on to another team member, Marissa.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marissa Alexander. I am the Improving Criminal Justice Response Senior Specialist here at Ujima.
Hi, y'all. I'm Christina Velez. I am the Legal and Policy Director of Assista. And I think we're going to move into a poll, actually, so that we can learn more about who's with us today. Here are your options. Please answer so that we know who's with us and so that we can take that into account as we're moving forward. You can answer that you are an immigration attorney or a DOJ accredited rep working with immigrant survivors. You're an attorney working primarily in family court or other civil legal services. You are a DVSA advocate, or you are a legal assistant, law student, or other valuable member of the support staff for an OVW grantee organization, and that includes interpreters. It's in the 81% have participated. Let's see, leave it open for a couple seconds more. Okay, I think this is good. Share the results. Looks like we have a majority of our attendees today are immigration attorneys or DOJ accredited reps working with immigrant survivors, followed by legal assistants, law students, or other valuable members of OVW grantee organizations. And I'm glad to also see DVSA advocates and attorneys working in family court and other services also with us today. So all of your experiences and knowledge and observations will be really helpful to us as we move through the presentation today. Thank you. And I will now turn it over to Kelly.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for our learning objectives today, by participating in this webinar, you will be better able to, number one, examine the role that intersectionality plays in Black immigrant survivors' lives and experiences with violence, to explore and envision strategies that shift power and center Black immigrant survivor experiences when engaging with multiple systems, to understand anti-Blackness in civil and criminal legal systems and its effect on Black immigrant survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence, to understand the impact of anti-Blackness on immigrant survivors, and to use practical tips when working with Black immigrant survivors. Next slide, please. And I believe, Marissa, this is you.
Thank you, Kelly. So here at Ujima, our mission is we are a global resource center that provides training and technical assistance, amongst other things. We work with grantees because we really want a world where Black women and girls are valued, respected, safe, and free from violence. We want the community to come and help us in this mission, and we believe it takes collective work and responsibility for us to accomplish this vision. You can go to the next slide, please. All right, so what does Ujima actually do? I'd like to share with you that we give a voice alongside support for Black women and girls is necessary. We believe it is necessary. And we do this by engaging persons in the community We want all of our community, women, men, children, LGBTQ, gender nonconforming, to have access and safety and justice. At Ujima, we will, excuse me, at Ujima, we believe that it's incorporated in the strategies, but the things that we employ. We have a research team that gathers articles and data for specific requests or policy development. Ujima provides outreach and capacity building, where we go into communities, we go to exhibitions, we go to festivals, different shows. We provide that education, public awareness, training assistance, training and technical assistance. For example, like the training we are providing here today. And if anybody wants to follow up, that information will be at the end of the presentation. You can go to the next slide. So the areas that we are focused on are sexual violence, domestic violence, community violence, sex and labor trafficking, and institutional structural violence. And we really feel that in order to address intimate partner violence or the violence that someone is experiencing with their partner in the Black community, we must deal with the institutional and structural violence, because these things have a great impact on what remedies are actually available. And in addressing these issues, they are critical to access because it can be complicated for marginalized and underserved communities. Ujima is now being a global, we're looking at different countries in Africa on that continent. And the initiative is to be better informed about how our community here in the United States, when we are serving immigrant survivors. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so here are a few of the workshop agreements. We would like you to be open and actively listening, be present. Sometimes our minds can wander, but we're hoping that you can check back in and make sure that you're really soaking up some of this information and hoping that it's helpful for you. Push yourself past the edge of your comfort zone. And sometimes if it hits you, then that's probably a good place for you to try to check that, okay? Always be respectful and respectfully challenge one another. Lean in and lean out, and to continue, even after this presentation today, to have conversations within your organizations and with your colleagues and peers. We can go to the next slide. I think it will be Ms. Ayana.
Right. Thank you, Marissa, for starting us out. Oh, we gave him the answer, but we're just gonna act like it's not there. But basically, what is race, right? Like, this is a whole conversation. We're talking about anti-Blackness. It has to do something with race. What is it? Why do we talk about it? How did it become a thing? Why is it important to talk about? Give me your thoughts in the chat. And we have an answer here, but how did race become a thing? Why is it important to talk about? Why should we talk about it? What can we do as advocates around these conversations? What are your thoughts? Folks are like, is there, Ayana? Okay, it's coming in. So racism sadly still exists. Yes, we should talk about it because racism is still a thing. It's important to talk about because people are perceived because of how people are perceived based on their race. Yes, Michelle, it's a social construct. Although race is socially constructed, it has real life impacts. Race has no scientific basis. Race is used as a tool to oppress folks. Again, a social construct based in colonialism. I see group power over another. I see social man-made construct, absolutely. It's embedded in so many systems, absolutely. Race is a powerful force in human interactions and has real consequences. Yes, Susanna. And then a social construct for imperialists and colonial powers to distract people from the true issues, keeping the majority down. All right, Ariel. So I'll take all of that because all of that is true, right? Race absolutely is a social political construct. So it's a made up thing. Biologically, we are no different. There is no real thing such as race. And still, the history of race tells us that it's very meaningful. It's very powerful. Race was constructed really as a tool to determine who could be property and who could sell that property. And so we know that folks have looked a lot different for a long time, but we know that race is a tool because it wasn't actually encoded in our language and in our laws until the 1500s. And so to think about why was that, again, it absolutely had connect ties or direct ties to slavery, and again, who was able to be property and who was able to sell that property. And so the history of race, we're not going to go into it too much, but to really think about race, and people would say, oh, the African race has thicker skin, has smaller brains, has fewer pain receptors. And so even though we've come a long way, we still really have to talk about race for all those reasons folks listed of it has very meaningful and real life impacts for how people are able to navigate this world, navigate society, how they're treated when they go reach out for victim services, or even just how they interact with different systems. Next slide. And so when we think about ethnicity, and again, this is just ground language, very simple definitions and explanations. When we think about ethnicity, a lot of times we see people conflate language. They'll say things like race and ethnicity as if they're the same thing, but they're actually very different in terms of how you're able to self-express or not. So we are given classifications. We are told you fit in this box. Ethnicity is a little different because it's actually how you self-identify. And so ethnicity is a population whose members identify with each other on the common basis of shared nationality, shared cultural traditions, language, beliefs, etc. So my quick example of the difference between race and ethnicity is that, for instance, both my husband and I identify as Black. I identify as Black American. He identifies as Haitian American. Two different ethnic traditions, two different ethnic communities, different traditions around food, different languages, different religions, different entry points into the US, and different experiences in terms of immigration or perceptions even. So it's very easy to say, oh, they're both Black, but yes, I'm Black American, he's Haitian American. We have very different lived realities and expectations in terms of how we maneuver this society. So we have race, we have ethnicity. Next slide. And when we think about ethnicity further, it's a really great way to, or a really great opportunity to think about our language, think about identity. And we see it very clearly when it comes to our Hispanic, Latinx, Latina family. And Hispanic usually refers to those who speak Spanish, while Latino, Latina, Latina usually more so refers to geography. So it could be someone in Latin America, the Caribbean, South America, or Central America as well. We've seen that the usage and language, again, is often conflated, but it can be very impactful if you're not using the right ethnic community or right geographic community to talk about folks that you're trying to serve. Next slide. And perfect example of like why you really have to hone in on ethnicity. Someone from Brazil is Latinx or Latina, but not Hispanic. And someone from Spain is Hispanic, but not Latinx or Latina. And to think about the why of that, if someone from Brazil speaks what language? Not Spanish, it's Portuguese. We have to think about, again, colonial systems, think about colorism for Black folks in those communities, think about language, think about tradition. They're very different. And so we want to make sure that we're being accurate in how we're describing people's experiences and being accurate in the terms of services that we might provide them, because folks aren't going to need the same things all the time. Next slide. And stay there, don't give them the answer. Culture is what? And put it in the chat. What's culture? Can you have more than one? Is it really that important to talk about culture? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? So someone said, as some things are keep rolling through, your description of people being from Spain as not being Latino is incorrect. I'm from Spain. So folks may say that. It's really up to, when you're talking about ethnicity, you let people self-identify. So if someone from Spain wants to identify as Latino, they can, of course. And if someone from Spain wants to say, no, I'm Hispanic, then we let them say that. Thanks for adding that. So culture has to do with traditions, food, music, spiritual practices, beliefs, customs, arts, absolutely, traditions, and how those communities create and pass down those traditions. Cultures are traditions that are practiced. You can definitely have more than one, absolutely. So let's give them the answer. So culture, simply put, is a body of beliefs and ideas or ideals used for cohesion and conformity. Really, it's the ground rules for how we operate together, how we operate in community, and how we operate in society. So for example, the culture that you're a part of will dictate the roles and responsibilities for relationships, for family structure, for workplace structure, which is why we absolutely can have more than one. Yeah, we can absolutely have more than one culture that we exist in. We have our work culture, we have our family culture, we have our friend group culture. And so we're constantly maneuvering in and out of these various cultures. And especially when we add in those pieces of ethnicity and race, it gets really creative and really interesting for how different cultures can be. Next slide. And so what is prejudice? Simply put, what is prejudice and why do we need to talk about it in the legal system? So prejudice has to do something with harmful biases, prejudgment, preconceived notions about a group of people, judging others based on one's belief or that of that particular other, having negative stereotypes, attitudes towards a person or group of people. And let's go ahead and give that answer. So prejudice, again, very simply put, is a preconceived opinion without just grounds or before sufficient knowledge. So let's put a pin in that and let's go to the next slide. So we have prejudice, it's a preconceived opinion. What is bias then? Because it's slightly different. What are our thoughts? If prejudice is a preconceived opinion, how then is bias slightly different? So it might be a preference, it could be positive or negative. A thought that's in favor of, yes, can be more subconscious, potentially. Other thoughts? So let's go ahead and give that answer. So bias is a tendency, inclination, or prejudice toward or against something or someone. Biases are often based on stereotypes rather than actual knowledge of an individual or circumstance. The way I think about it, again, very baseline, the way I think about the difference between prejudice and bias is, let's say Millicent's like, hey, Ayana, come to the St. Patrick's Day party with me. It's going to be a blast. I know you love to dance. I know you love food and music. It's going to be so fun. Some leprechauns are going to be there. It's going to be a great time. And I'm like, no, Millicent, I don't want to go to the St. Patrick's Day party because I heard that leprechauns are greedy. I heard they'll try to rob you. I heard they'll like literally take stuff out of your bag. They always start fights at parties. I don't want to go. My uncle once dated a leprechaun and she was like that. So I just really want nothing to do with it. And Millicent, her very trauma-informed, person-centered way is, Yana, I hear some things coming up. Have you actually had really negative experiences with leprechauns? And I'm like, no, I haven't really had experience directly, but I still know all those things and I'm still informed, right? That's prejudice. It's a preconceived opinion. You really don't have a real reason, a holistic version of what that person is. It might simply be what you heard, what you thought, what you were told about that community. That's prejudice. Bias, we have the same conversation. Millicent's, Ayana, food, music, dancing. It's going to be a great time. Let's go. And I'm like, Millicent, I don't want to go with you because remember last year when we went to the party and the leprechauns stole so-and-so's purse and they pushed over the punch bowl and they started that brawl and they were all the things that I thought they were going to be. I don't want to go. That's bias. I've had some slight interaction. It still is most likely not holistic. It still is most likely very limited, largely based in stereotypes, but there is some background to have informed my perception. Now, biases, again, we mentioned can be seemingly positive or seemingly negative. So there's a stereotype often or a bias often that folks will say things like, I only want an Asian doctor, right? Because there are certain stereotypes or tropes or stigmas about that community, seemingly positive. But again, what happens to folks who aren't seen as smart or aren't seen as whatever to get that access? Next slide. And so stereotypes, and we can go ahead and give this answer. A lot of us are very familiar. We can spot them. We can point them out when we know them. But stereotypes are widely held, but fixed and oversimplified images or ideas of a particular type of person, group, or thing. And they're largely derived from pop culture, from movies, music, media, but they're also derived from our families. They're derived from our friends group. They're derived from school books that have revisionist history. There are a lot of different ways in which stereotypes are coming in. So again, quick example. I know a lot of people, or most people, have probably heard the stereotype that all Black people like fried chicken. Now, as delicious as fried chicken may very well be, to simply say that all Black people just all over the world love and eat fried chicken is a massive oversimplification of the diversity of Black communities, because fried chicken is a Black Southern food tradition. So a lot of folks are not eating fried chicken at their holiday meals. A lot of folks are vegetarian and vegan within the Black community, and it's deeply rooted to their spiritual and religious practices. So again, to simply say all Black people do this is a real oversimplification for the depth of who we are as people in our communities. Next slide. And so for Ujima, to really make sure we are defining the Black community through our own lens and how we're able to self-identify ourselves is really important. So we define the Black community as being part of 4 large subgroups. We have Black Americans who are either descendants of enslaved or freed people in the US. We have African, including immigrant, refugee, and asylee communities, and then Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latinx as well. We understand that this is not a limiting, but it's really a broad start to our goal in terms of being inclusive and being holistic in order to recognize who we are as part of a diaspora. And as part of the Black community, we understand that this definition is not absolute, but to really emphasize that we are not a monolithic people, and there are many different ways of being and of being Black. Next slide. And I love to really make sure folks understand the language of misogynoir as well, in addition to anti-Blackness, right? And so misogynoir is a term that was coined by queer Black feminist and scholar and professor Moya Bailey back in 2010 to describe the specific ways in which racism and misogyny combine to oppress Black women. So the term itself is newly coined rather, but the experience is decades and centuries old. So the way I think about misogynoir is, how has misogyny and Black womanhood collided? What are the ripple effects? What are the outcomes? How does it permeate different systems? And so if folks have some examples, feel free to drop them in the chat. But misogynoir is things like back in 2004, Don Imus feeling entitled enough to call the Black women on the Rutgers basketball team nappy-headed hoes on live radio. It's the constant and still ongoing attacks of former First Lady Michelle Obama, who was called everything from ugly to mannish to classless to uneducated, even though she is one of the most educated first ladies we've had. It's a lack of available hair care products for Black women, or having those hair care products be locked under lock and key and not having access to them, or they just being overpriced in certain communities. What else is misogynoir? What else could it be? And feel free to drop your examples in the chat. Angel Reese's treatment during the NCAA championship. Absolutely. What else? High rates of Black maternal mortality, the treatment of Black women in medical communities, high volume of young Black girls being expelled from schools versus their non-Black classmates. Absolutely. We always talk about the school to prison pipeline, but we forget it happens to girls too. Not seeing Black women as victims, labeling Black women as angry when they voice their opinions, when Black women expressing themselves are dismissed as being angry. Absolutely. What else? We see it where Black lawyers are assumed to be clients instead of lawyers, unsolved murders of Black women, seeing Black girls as fast. Absolutely. The strong Black women, they can take it, over sexualization of Black women, adultification of Black girls, which is really the perception that Black girls are older and more mature than their peers. The concept that Black women must be likable in order to be accepted. Absolutely. Treatment of Black women in the child welfare system and the incredible rates of Black children within that system as well. We see it where Black survivors aren't seen as trafficking survivors, and they're just seen as being complicit or part of the problem. And so to weave in these different pieces of misogynoir with people's experiences around race and as they navigate the system, we really have to have fuller conversations about what's happening with survivors. Next slide. Oh, I see another comment. In December 2014, the African American Policy Forum and the Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies, the hashtag Say Her Name campaign brings awareness to the often invisible names of stories of Black women and girls who have been victimized by racist police violence and provides support to their families. Thank you, Michelle. Even if Black women are murdered at incredibly high rates by law enforcement as well, and the calls to action aren't as loud. Our names aren't remembered. People aren't standing in the streets for us the same way. This doesn't mean that Black men don't deserve the acknowledgement and the awareness that they get, but what's happening with Black women is the question, right? And so when we think about misogynoir, it's largely based in a lot of the racialized sexual tropes that exist about Black women. So racialized sexual tropes emerged during the slave eras, but have absolutely continued to be passed down and perpetuated from generation to generation. And we've actually seen an evolution of some of these tropes during different time periods. And I know we're going to get into it in just a little bit. So the myth of the overbearing matriarch, the mammy, and the Jezebel images all actually came directly out of the slave eras. We have the matriarch, who is seen as overbearing, seen as driving men away, was a workhorse, could reproduce, but wasn't desirable. We then have the mammy. She was typically imagined as darker skin, as fuller figured, but she was seen as the happy slave. Always think Shirley Temple era, but she was seen as the happy slave, loved to serve, happy with her station in life, basically happy living her life in servitude. And she was generally seen as asexual. She was also the one to breastfeed the plantation owners' babies before she was allowed to breastfeed her own. And then we have the Jezebel, who is more typically seen as having lighter skin tones, finer hair texture, having more European features as well. But she was seen as hypersexual, sexually available and indiscriminate, flirtatious. And so whatever physical or sexual violence was enacted upon her body, she deserved it because she was too wanton, she was too loose, and that's what happens to women like her. We then have the welfare queen, Sapphire, and Black superwomen, which all came later, closer to the civil rights movement and the war on drugs, where the welfare queen is seen as lazy, scamming the system, doesn't want to work, but wants to keep having a whole bunch of babies and rely on the system to take care of her and her family. We have the Sapphire, who is the neo-Jezebel image, really. She's seen as loud, angry, exploits men for money, uses her body to get what she wants. This is where the gold digger trope comes from. And then we have the Black superwoman, from this list, seemingly the most positive, where if you're a Black superwoman, you can, you will, and you want to do it all. You'll figure it out. You're strong. You're going to make things happen for yourself. You don't need a partner. You definitely don't need a man. You don't need anybody because you'll figure it out because you're strong. Now, again, from this list, seemingly very positive in comparison to the others, but it's actually incredibly limiting for then Black women being seen as vulnerable, or Black women being seen as victims, or Black women being able to reach out for help or ask for help. We then have the angry, bitter Black woman, who really can be applied to any Black woman at any time. It's usually when the Black woman pushes back and is, no, I don't agree, or no, I don't like this, or I'm just gonna say no. Suddenly you're very angry and bitter, even if you aren't actually. And oftentimes Black women being called angry and bitter is a way to keep us silent and keep us from not explaining what's hurting us or not talking about what we aren't okay with. And then the last is the scheming immigrant, where it really exists within all communities of color, but especially when we think about in conjunction with some of these others, how Black women and Black immigrant women or Black people are seen as scheming, are seen as being mischievous, are seen as wanting to take advantage of resources, wanting to take advantage of their partner, and aren't really seen as being good partners or honorable people, especially as they're coming into the US. Next slide. And when we think about what does this mean in terms of folks' experiences, both misogynoir and those racialized tropes and anti-Blackness, we really start to see how our statistics are on the rise. Our statistics are very high in terms of how we experience violence. 41% of Black women have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner during their lifetimes. Between 40 and 60% of Black women report being subjected to coercive sexual contact by the age of 18. And I always like to pause there, right? Of like, between 40 and 60, regardless, either of those numbers is very high. Between 40 and 60% of Black women report being subjected to coercive sexual contact by the time they reach age 18. And so when we talk about adultification, when we talk about Black girls not being seen as children, we really start to see how these things permeate our society and our culture. In the US, almost 40% of Black women have experienced sexual violence other than rape during their lifetime, and 40% of confirmed sex trafficking survivors in the US are Black. And think about that in comparison to our actual population size in the US. Next slide. The average age of Black female homicide victims is 5 years younger than the average age for other women. 43% of domestic violence survivors arrested along with their abusive partners or as a result of a complaint lodged by their abusive partner were living below the poverty line. And of that 43%, 66% were either Black or Latino. And then Black women ages 25 to 29 are 11 times more likely as white women in that same age group to be murdered while pregnant or in their first year after childbirth. Now, all of these stats does not mean that Black men in the Black community is inherently more violent. What it does mean is that when we are experiencing violence, the systems that we're reaching out to or the systems we're engaging with or choosing not to engage with are having a larger impact than a lot of folks are willing to talk about. And it's things like implicit bias, It's things like very blatant bias or stereotypes. It's things like racialized tropes in our systems. And really not talking about anti-Blackness is why we're seeing these rates stay where they are. Next slide. And so when I think about how do we connect systems and identities, or why should we connect systems and identities, it really gets us to thinking about intersectionality. And it's basically the relationship that we as people and the different identities that we hold as people, those relationships with different systems that we have to engage in. And so if we think about who is the most normalized person in our society, the list is very small for what that norm looks like, right? It's US citizen, white, male, middle class, college educated, has a passport, never been incarcerated, never done drugs. Like the list gets so small with who's considered the norm. And still, we've seen the impact that folks who are not considered the norm have to deal with or have to manage as they navigate different systems. And so these norms are absolutely maintained. Like we continue to know who's the norm and who's not through things like racism, ableism, discrimination, sexism, classism, transphobia, ageism. Like that keeps us in line with knowing who's the norm and who's not, and who's centered and who's not. And so in the chat, again, let me know, how have we seen different identities navigate these larger systems? Like, how do we see Black people navigate the legal system? How do we see Black people navigate politics, navigate the economy, navigate the immigration system, the education system? How are we seeing where there's inaccess or not? And so the fact that in 2023, I live in Baltimore City, so I'll give it as an example, the fact that in 2023, there were certain schools shut down during the summer because schools still don't have AC in their buildings. And some schools still don't have heat in their buildings. And some schools don't have books, but children are supposed to learn at the exact same rate and same level, right? How are we seeing it play out in the immigration system, in the legal system as well? Give us some examples. So we've seen over incarceration of Black men and trans women. What else? I see CPB1 does not recognize faces, particularly Black faces. Black immigrants are more likely to be detained by ICE. Absolutely. What else? Black women lose custody of their children if they don't have the abusers arrested. Yes, what else? I always think about how survivors would often come back from court and say things like, the judge was more interested in my skirt than what I had to say, or reprimanding me because they felt my top was too low in the courtroom. So body politics and policing of bodies happens. What else? And panel, free to add in if you have some examples you want to share too. I see the majority of applications are discretionary, leading anti-Black sentiments negatively impact certain migrants from communities such as Liberia or Nigeria, where are known as scam countries. Absolutely. Thank you for that example. What else? Not seeking help because of fear of the child welfare system or an unjust system. Absolutely. Not believing Black women and requiring additional evidence aside from their word. That's something that happens to them. Yes. So you need a whole bunch of proof in order to prove your story, where other folks, their word is taken for what it is. Cross arrest for Black women survivors of DV. Absolutely, Christina, that happens all the time, where Black women are told, well, if we can't figure out who's the aggressor, both of you will go. I see a comment from Susanna. USCIS penalizes those with criminal histories, even just arrests, not only convictions. Since Black women are more likely to be over-policed, they are more likely to have those arrests on their records. Clients then have to overcompensate with thousands of positive discretionary factors. Yep. And I've seen it in shelter as well, where a lot of shelter systems are screening out survivors from shelter based on their judiciary case search results. And I'm like, they haven't even gotten to the shelter yet. Maybe, yeah, they have that arrest on their record, but maybe they stole Pampers because their abusive partner wouldn't give them money to buy those things, right? Penalizing those that use state resources against their immigration cases, absolutely, Liv. Other thoughts? Any other thoughts? Black asylum seekers lose more often. Thank you, Rex. And so we really have to think about, it's not just misogynoir, it's not just bias, there's anti-Blackness that permeates our systems, and we really have to be able to call it out in order to serve survivors the best way. Next slide. And so what we were talking about, really just the term of it, is intersectionality. It was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a great theorist to get to know their work. But intersectionality, simply put, again, is a framework designed to explore the dynamics between identities and what she called connected systems of oppression. So what is your relationship based on your race, class, and gender? What is your relationship with these different systems that might be based on patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism, for instance? Next slide. And just a quick reminder, as full and creative and exciting as intersectionality can be, and really thinking about all the different layers of experience and identity, we also have to recognize that based on your different identities, you may also be at greater risk in different systems. So we've seen that in the Black community, multi-generational trauma together with continued oppression and in the absence for opportunities to heal or access benefits has resulted for many in post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I actually have a great resource I'll send to Kelly and Christina that we can probably share out after, that really looks at what post-traumatic slave syndrome is and why it's not just something you can just ignore. Trauma lives in our bodies. Trauma is passed down generationally. And so if we're not talking about it, we're not undoing the harm that's been done to our various communities. Next slide. And just a really great post that I saw that I was like, I have to include this in my trainings because it's a great reminder for when you talk about identity, when you talk about layered violence. It says, use caution when describing barriers. Being Black is not a barrier for me. White supremacy is the barrier. Being female is not a barrier for me. Patriarchy is the barrier. Name the systems of power. These are the barriers, right? And so we don't want to put blame on people for simply being who they are as full people. We really want to put blame on the system that has not allowed people to be full people and get the access and the resources that they need. Next slide.
I think that's me. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much, Ayana and Marissa. That was really great and helpful. Now we're going to offer a little bit more historical grounding about anti-Blackness, specifically in the immigration system. Next slide, please. All right. So anti-Blackness is deeply rooted in the immigration system, as it is in other systems that organize and mediate life in the United States. And so in this session, we'll be discussing anti-Blackness in family, benefits, and criminal legal systems, and teasing apart some of the layers that Ayana just presented with us. All of those systems evolved to their present form in relation to anti-Blackness and their impact on how Black immigrants navigate the immigration system is really what we're here to talk about today. But as the history of Black people and communities in the United States largely began with slavery and the capture and involuntary relocation of Africans to the Americas as the property of white people, it's important to consider that legacy when we look at how Black immigrants fare under our immigration and other laws. So that is our starting point, along with all the other additional layers. Immigration law has also evolved out of anti-Blackness. As with other rights of citizenship, including voting and access to courts, early immigration laws was limited citizenship to white men. Early courts did not even consider Black witnesses to be credible. Early immigration laws did not specifically target Black people, but reflected and enforced white supremacist nation-building priorities. So one of the first immigration laws in the books was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was one of several policies that intended to exclude people of color from the United States, including the mass deportation of Mexicans across newly drawn borders without regard to where they were born. The voluntary immigration of Black people and other groups of non-white people to the US only began to increase as the immigration laws became less restrictive following the Civil Rights struggle, following the Civil Rights Act of 1964, less than 100 years ago. So we're seeing the continued impact of anti-Blackness and how Black immigrants are treated in the immigration system today. And this slide has some examples of what that looks like. First, the legacy of slavery and its atrocities is very much, I think, reflected, as some of you said in the chat earlier, in the higher rates of violence that Black migrants experience in immigration detention, even in how immigration detention is structured and who is detained in the first place. Second, the federal government has a long history of expelling Haitians seeking refuge, and its treatment of Haitians continues to be marked by differential treatment. And I urge everyone to check out the videos in the podcast about John v. Nelson that is in the materials. That was the 1985 Supreme Court case that challenged the mass detention and due process violations experienced by Haitian immigrants fleeing political violence. A few years later, in 1991, the government detained around 32,000 Haitian asylum seekers at Guantanamo Bay, classifying them as economic migrants and sowing fear of Haitians as carriers of HIV. About 250 out of those 32,000, 250 HIV positive Haitian migrants remained after the rest were quickly deported. And they eventually won entry to the United States. There are more and continuing examples, including the beating and expulsion under Title 42 of Haitian migrants at Del Rio. Benefits won, such as TPS, are hard fought, and I think many people would say not sufficient to meet their needs, but the example of the treatment of Haitian migrants, specifically under our immigration laws, I think is very revealing as to how our entire system is viewing Black immigrants coming to seek refuge in the United States. So I'm going long on this slide, but as you can see also, the expansion of criminalization in the mid-1990s and the simultaneous expansion of immigration bases for removal and inadmissibility of immigrants with criminal contacts has also spawned disparate impacts across the criminal and immigration legal systems, along with the consequences across legal systems, civil legal systems. And finally, of course, the immigration system is not at all immune from the stereotypes and narratives about Black people and women and girls that Ayana just presented to us, and that you in the chat added a lot of texture to. They reverberate, of course, across the immigration system in negative credibility, character, and discretion assessments that also amplify the negative outcomes of these other systems that we'll be talking about today. So we'll be looking more closely at all of this in the client scenarios that we've prepared, and we'll be inviting a lot more input from attendees. And I think the next slide I'm sending back to Ayana.
Yeah, so this is just a super quick example because imagery is really important to how we understand narratives. But a couple quick examples of how we've seen anti-Blackness show up. So, the one on the bottom, just immigration is a Black issue. It's in reference to the disregard that a lot of people have in terms of how are we directly talking about anti-Blackness in the immigration system, and the fact that Black people experience higher rates of deportation or higher rates of just being in contact with the system. The one on top with the horse is in reference to the fact that still today, it was like 2019, 2021, 22, 23, we still have people rounding up Black migrants on horses with lassos, which harkens back to a certain time period that we really have to be willing to acknowledge. It's not okay to treat people like actual human beings, like cattle. And what does that mean in terms of imagery of slave catching even? And then the one has a couple different states, but in reference to the incredibly high rates of violence that Black people experience as they navigate detainment or navigate the immigration system as well. And so again, really thinking about, it's not just people being a part of a system, it's what happens when they're in that system. How are they also experiencing multiple layers of violence?
I think we go to Kelly now.
Mhm. One more slide, please. Thank you. Thank you so much, both Christina, Ayana, and Marissa, for all of those really great points. I'm going to touch a little bit on anti-Blackness in the criminal legal system and the intersection with some of those harmful stereotypes that Ayana had discussed earlier on. To start, let's just ground ourselves in the fact that we do have a criminal legal system that disproportionately arrests and incarcerates Black people here in the United States. And then intersecting with the systemic racism that is already in that system are these insidious stereotypes about Black women that may lead criminal legal system actors to actually disbelieve survivors who identify as Black women. First, I'd like to talk about the impact of mandatory and pro-arrest policies on Black women. Very broadly, these policies, they either require or encourage arrest when there's probable cause to believe that domestic violence has occurred. When the Violence Against Women Act was proposed about 30 years ago now, Black women did raise concerns about the effect of these policies on their communities. Those concerns did go unaddressed, but the research has actually supported that they are valid concerns. There's a scholar named Rhea Shindi who noted that these policies, they increase Black women and girls' exposure to racial and gender stereotyping, and that they lead to a greater likelihood of experiencing police brutality, as Ayana was talking about before, and entering the criminal legal system, which as a non-citizen could have really damaging impacts. I'd also like to talk more about some of those stereotypes, which are a product of systemic racism. The first is the stereotype that Black women are allegedly not credible. There's also the stereotype that they're inappropriately aggressive or hypersexual. And as we'll see today throughout the scenarios that we'll talk about, these stereotypes really can result, they could be deeply held by system actors, and they can result in unjust outcomes for Black immigrant survivors who identify as women. Scholars have noted that the false claim that Black women are not credible, that does have its origins in slavery. And to demonstrate just how pervasive it is, scholars have pointed to the examples of Anita Hill and Desiree Washington, prominent Black women who were survivors of gender-based violence and testified under oath, but were still disbelieved. And judges and jurors and prosecutors, they might harbor these racist stereotypes about Black women's alleged lack of credibility, which could make them less likely to believe, for example, a claim that a Black woman was a victim at all, or a Black woman's claim to have acted in self-defense. There's also the pervasive stereotypes rooted in systemic racism about Black women being allegedly angry, inappropriately aggressive, or incapable of experiencing fear or pain. And underlying these stereotypes is a false assumption, which the scholar Beth Ritchie really expresses really well when she says that there's this assumption that Black women, that they act out of anger, aggression, and vindictiveness, not fear, pain, or terror. And when criminal justice system actors, such as police, jurors, and prosecutors, when they hold those beliefs, they can think that Black women cannot possibly be afraid of abuse, which could weaken a self-defense claim, or they might even think that Black women are not deserving of protection. One scholar has noted that these stereotypes also mean that police are more likely to see Black women as aggressors. And this is problematic when officers are required to identify the primary aggressor before they make an arrest. And if police are predisposed to seeing Black women as aggressors because of these racist stereotypes, Black immigrant survivors who identify as women, they'll continue to be arrested and face those collateral immigration consequences. And then the last stereotype that I wanted to touch on is the one about Black women's alleged hypersexuality, which Ayanna had talked about earlier, that it was used to justify slavery. And a historical example of that is rape laws in the US colonies, which all said that rape was a crime committed against white women. Black women were actually not even considered part of the definition of rape victim. And that isn't just a stereotype from the past, it absolutely persists into the present day. And this really matters because system actors who hold these beliefs, they might be more likely to think that a Black woman is somehow responsible for being raped or is actually not capable of being raped. Next slide, please. This webinar is not a deep dive on the immigration consequences of criminal convictions, but I do just want to emphasize the importance of screening and just how intertwined these two systems are. Criminal legal system contacts can have very serious negative impacts for non-citizens. The precise impact depends on a lot of different factors, such as the non-citizen's status, whether they were tried in the juvenile or the adult system, and the ultimate outcome of the case, which is also known as the disposition. Criminal legal system contacts, they can cause problems at different points of the immigration system, including assessments of what's called inadmissibility or deportability, good moral character, as well as discretion, which some people were talking about in the chat. And many immigration applications, including some survivor-based forms of relief, do have a discretionary element to them. And discretionary adjudications, unfortunately, do leave room for the adjudicator to bring their own biases into that adjudication and punish Black immigrant survivors who have been criminalized because of over-policing and misogynoir. And we'll talk later in the webinar about ways that practitioners can push back against that bias. Can we go forward 2 slides, please? Thank you. So special immigrant juvenile status, this is going to be relevant when we talk about one of the case scenarios in a minute. Special immigrant juvenile status is available for immigrant children who are under 21 and unmarried and who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents. It is a requirement for SIJS, as it's called, to get a court order from a state court that has findings about dependency or custody, parental reunification, abuse, neglect, or abandonment, and whether it's in the child's best interest to return to their country of origin. You'll see here on your screen a point about admissibility. Admissibility is required if someone is applying for a green card or adjustment of status based on SIJS, not actually required for the petition itself. Next slide, please. And then the U visa, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, just very briefly, it's for victims of qualifying crimes in the United States, including sexual assault, domestic and dating violence, and stalking, who have suffered mental or physical abuse and have been helpful to the police or some other investigative agency in their investigation or prosecution of the crime. A law enforcement certification is required to prove that cooperation, but it does not have to come from the police. It could come from a different agency. And if the victim was under the age of 16 at the time of that crime, a parent, guardian, or someone called a next friend can cooperate on their behalf with the police. And next slide, please. Also won't delve too deeply into this, but this slide just has some considerations about the immigration consequences of juvenile adjudications of delinquency, which I'll refer to as adjudications. There are 2 main lessons. The first is that an adjudication is not a conviction for immigration purposes, but it can still be a negative discretionary factor. And then second, even though an adjudication itself is not a conviction for immigration purposes, depending on the type of adjudication, it could implicate conduct-based grounds of inadmissibility that don't require a conviction. So what do I mean by that? For example, there's a ground of inadmissibility that says there's a reason to believe that a person is a drug trafficker. If someone has a juvenile adjudication for, say, selling drugs, that ground of inadmissibility could be contemplated because there's no conviction required. Similarly, there's a drug abuser or addict ground If someone has an adjudication for drug possession, even marijuana possession, that ground could be implicated. While it's better to have an adjudication than an adult conviction, it's important to recognize that not all of your clients who were in the system as children will have juvenile adjudications. Some of them may have adult convictions. Because of systemic racism, Black children are more likely to be tried in the adult system. And if your client committed an offense as a child but was tried and convicted as an adult, they may have to request a waiver for that conviction. And it's important to have context and research sources on systemic racism ready to present in those cases. And can we go back 3 slides, please? Thank you. So we have Marcia. She's a brown-skinned Black 18-year-old. She was brought to the United States from Haiti as a child by her mother, who was fleeing domestic violence in their home country. After her mother died, Marcia was placed in foster care and she experienced abuse and neglect. In high school, she was suspended for being aggressive. And then that same day that she was out of school, because of the suspension, she was arrested for shoplifting a sandwich at a nearby deli. Marcia speaks English fluently with an American accent. So how has Marcia been failed by systems actors? And feel free to pop your thoughts in the chat.
I think we're gonna invite back our colleagues from Ujima to also respond to some of these questions, right?
Being abused in the foster care system, exactly. System that was supposed to protect her. Exactly. It seems like also the education system has failed her. She was suspended for a pretty vague reason that looks like it's rooted in adultification and racist false stereotypes about Black girls. She's also been failed by a criminal legal system that seems to have devoted its resources to over policing Black communities and taking punitive approaches to activities that are better dealt with therapeutically. There's also seems to be an intersection here of failures in all of these different systems. And we see that Marcia was arrested on a day that she was out of school because of that suspension, which, you know, itself was rooted in most likely racist stereotypes. And remember, she also had experienced harm in her foster home. So it's likely that, you know, the day that she was out of school, maybe she didn't want to be at home. So she went out into the community, may have been hungry. For many children, school is the only place where they're guaranteed at least one nutritious meal. She, because of that racist suspension, she was deprived of that. So she might have taken that sandwich as a last resort. And then because of that, she got caught up in this system that prioritizes these punitive approaches over solutions that really prioritize the root causes of criminalized activities. Do any of my colleagues have any thoughts on that?
Hi, I just want to mention that it's apparent that her survival or the methods that she was using to survive was criminalized.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is also one of the situations where the intake that you have with Marcia is going to be important because she's presenting as a Black American. She's Gen Z with an American accent. So the questions that you actually ask her need to not assume that she is a Black American or African American. You need to actually ask questions about when did she come to the United States? Does she have any idea about whether or not her mother took any steps to establish residency? Does she know whether or not she's undocumented or has any type of status? Clearly, many systems have failed her, right? Foster care, educational system, stealing a sandwich may or may not be seen by court as a crime of moral turpitude because it's theft. So trying to work through the criminal justice system to really look at the context in which it happened and not have that be overarching and major detriment to her. Obviously, the arrest is going to show up, but trying to work with the prosecutor and do other things are going to really help. But I would think that for attorneys, the actual intake with Marcia is the good place to start, asking those really solid questions and getting the information about who she is and her history.
And to Melissa's point, I think really narrowing in on the fact that she has such like compound trauma, not only just from having to escape Haiti with her mother from an abusive parent. Any type of border crossing could potentially have trauma there, even if it's not like a super traumatic thing. Experiencing trauma from her foster home, experiencing trauma in school, being labeled aggressive just automatically when it's trauma that's showing up. So to Marissa's point, like all of her survival behavior has been just written off as something else and not really examined in a full way.
And I would add that for folks who are not immigration attorneys here in the audience, they might encounter, I think a lot of immigration attorneys are going to encounter Marcia after she's been maybe referred to them by someone who did identify her needs. But for folks who are not immigration attorneys in the audience, one lesson of this, I think, that we want to impart is that it's really important to ask everybody a basic question about maybe where were they born, for example. A lot of people may not know what their immigration status is. They may not know when they came to this country. They may not know a lot of the kind of later details that we'll be trying to elicit from them. But the first question, one of the first questions that you should be asking them is, where were they born? It's an easy way to get to that first step of identifying whether they're potentially in need of immigration legal services. And also for the non-immigration attorneys in the audience, I think that we intended this example to show that there are a couple of different intervention points here, maybe which were missed, right, by advocates or by systems of support, right? She could have been identified earlier before she was way before she was 18 as someone in need of maybe immigration assistance. Perhaps she was, and we don't know, but assuming that she wasn't, it's also the arrest and whatever the proceeding is that follows the arrest is going to be a very important intervention point to avoid negative immigration outcomes for her, as well as other like lifelong, I think, like civil consequences of having a conviction on your record.
Definitely. And then in terms of her immigration options, what are some questions we would want to ask to get a sense of whether Marcia might be eligible for either SIJS or a U visa? And feel free to put your thoughts in the chat. Where are her parents? Someone made a really good point to just the host and panelists, so I'm gonna copy it for everybody. Some never know that they're immigrants, as parents never open the family history to discussion. Some first find out when applying to college. Really good point.
And it doesn't state when her mother did pass away, at what age, so she may not even know this information.
Assume she was born here. I'd be surprised. Yeah.
Some questions that we could think about are confirming, first of all, that Marcia, we know she's under 21, but confirming that she's not married. Probably not, but just confirming that. Figuring out, trying to get maybe records or from her recollection, understanding, was her immigration status ever mentioned in any type of child welfare proceedings? Was there any type of order in those proceedings that could potentially be used for SIJS? And if not, was Marcia in a state where she can now get an SIJS order at age 18? That's really just going to depend on where she lives. As Christina was saying, if this is a state where she's unfortunately not able to pursue SIJS now because of her age, that's an example of how that system really failed her, because they should have been paying attention to her needs, her full spectrum of needs when she was a child. I see the question, has she ever experienced abuse in the US? It seems like she did because of the abuse in the foster home. So that can go into, was she eligible for a U visa? Was that reported? Was she helpful in that report? Did another adult acting on her behalf be helpful in that report? So those are all questions we'd be asking. In terms of how the arrest will affect her, what do folks think about that?
May
It
not.
may not.
May have gotten
May
a
have gotten.
diversion. Although I think that's like as footnote to that.
Depends on the type of diversion. Yeah. Pre-adjudication versus post-adjudication. Yeah. Petty offense exception, hopefully. Exactly. So the question, there's like a few questions. Like first, was she in the juvenile or the adult system? A little unclear here. What was the final outcome? You know, if it was a diversion program, was it before she had to admit guilt, or did it require her to admit guilt? And then also, what type of immigration benefit is she applying for? Some types of immigration benefits don't require you to show admissibility, while others do. If it was a juvenile, this isn't a conviction, but it could be a negative discretionary factor. If this is an adult conviction, potentially could be eligible for petty offense exception, as Jessica mentioned. Someone talked about expungement. That is one factor. I won't go into it too much right now, but the expungement would have to be for certain reasons. If there was like a legal defect in the proceedings, if it was an expungement just because the system recognized she had been rehabilitated, that wouldn't be necessarily enough for immigration purposes. But you all made some great points, and in the interest of time, we will move on to the next slide.
Thank you. Which is after that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, 3 more slides, I think.
I think I'm back. Yes, I am. Okay, so now we're going to shift into more discussion about intersection of immigration legal system with other systems. We touched a bit on this when we discussed Marsha's situation, but here we're going to talk a little bit more about how family and benefits systems outcomes can impact a survivor's immigration status. Next slide. Okay, so again, grounding, to start again with how to understand how the anti-Blackness throughout these systems impacts Black immigrants, we need to consider how these systems evolved in relation to anti-Blackness. I would say, and I will invite my Ujima colleagues to weigh in here in a minute, but that the legacy of slavery and the narratives that were employed to maintain control over Black intimacy and Black reproduction that both prevented establishment of Black families and then also denied them rights to privacy and autonomy persist in some ways and are ingrained in some of the ideas that we talked about in the first part of this webinar. These narratives have also informed policy. For example, social welfare programs in the US were initially devised to support white widows of good moral character and also workers in the formal economy. And we have resources in the index that go more deeply into this history. It's pretty interesting. But Black workers who were excluded from salaried employment or who worked off the books, for example, may have been excluded from also social insurance programs. And as these programs became more accessible, and as the perception grew that more Black people were using welfare programs, so too did policies limiting the use of such programs, along with punitive measures and suspicion as to how these benefits were being administered. One anti-Black stereotype that we talked about a little earlier that was exploited for this purpose, for welfare reform specifically, was that of the welfare queen. The caricature of the welfare queen reflects centuries of anti-Black narratives and drove some of these negative policy changes that currently impact and target Black mothers, even though numerically most welfare recipients nationwide are not Black and fraud is not as rampant as you might think if you listen to these tropes. But so I will say that I am old enough to remember when this term welfare queen was quite commonly heard throughout the 80s and 90s. And I didn't fully understand where it came from or the history of it, despite being educated in the US. And I expect that it's not a political history that many new immigrants learn either without special effort, particularly not non-Black immigrants. And this impacts how they view welfare benefits and how they understand race in the United States. So that's something that we can talk about also for a very long time, but I'm going to turn it over now to talk about, share additional thoughts about this, and also talk about the family and child welfare systems. Thank you.
The family and child welfare system is the gift that keeps on giving. Once you're in, it's really hard to divest yourself. I think as we did the grounding earlier in this presentation, and Ayanna really did a good job in setting the stage for how bias and stereotypes really show up. When you look at the family and child welfare systems, this is where you see the intersection of it all, because this is where people are being viewed as whether or not they are a good parent, whether or not they are seen by the people in the system as being a positive. So when people walk in, when a survivor comes in and they're now in the system and people have bias or stereotypes to you, they may not understand why you dress a certain way or why you talk a certain way or why you are emphatic about something. Those things that might not be punitive to you outside of a court can have a detriment when you are judged a certain way when you're there. And sometimes when the courts are sitting in a certain way and they're, okay, we think you're okay, but we want you to do A, B, C, and D. The A, B, C, and D can be so punitive that you could lose your job, or you might not have access to A, B, C, and D. You might not have money to pay your part of A, B, and C, and D if it's a parenting class or anything like that. And you might not even have representation or an advocate or anyone to help you navigate A, B, and C, and D. So we have the court systems, all of their different parts. You have family and child welfare, you have all the other things that can come in the civil system, protection orders and everything else. For all the attorneys on this webinar, you know that all of the records about a survivor, all statements, anything on the public record, those things can also be used to impeach someone. They can be used negatively against you. And it can be very confusing, this language of law, for people who aren't used to being in a legal system. Even if it's something like there is a criminal case ongoing and someone has a protection order, you know how those things can conflict and that can be used against people, but a layperson does not know that. So a lot of times when the system and the court is looking at people, you just see the bias creeping in, because very few people are going to be perfect when they're talking about their trauma, when they are trying to prove that they are a good parent or they're not neglectful, when they are trying to prove that they have been abused or something happened, when personal things are expected to be shared, people can feel shame, people can feel fear. Our courts may not feel safe to people, especially if you are not familiar with our systems. How would it feel safe if you come from a country where courts are not safe, where law enforcement is less safe than it is here? Any of those things, that is who comes to the systems. And all of these things impact how people act when they're in the system. And then the people who are in the system that are sitting in positions of power who may have bias or the absolute stereotypes that exist, give people punitive outcomes. It can be very horrifying and very daunting for people. And one bad outcome, and someone goes back to their community and says, this is what happened to me when I tried to go to court. When I was in family court, this happened. It spreads. People then understand that's what happens when you go there, and it will not be good for you. And for a lot of people of color, it is not good for you.
And just real quick, even thinking about a parent might be referred for parenting classes, but that parenting class is nowhere near culturally relevant to their community. And so they're sitting in that class doing nothing, basically, right? Because they're not going to absorb that because it's not, again, culturally relevant to how they're going to raise their children. And so maybe they stop going and now they're in non-compliance. And so to think about just, again, how these systems are not set up to really benefit survivors in the way that they need. That's why we have to pick apart what's happening in our systems.
And you raised a good point, Ayanna, because access also is the language needs. If you're not seeing the breadth of the Black diaspora, you might not understand that somebody's not speaking English, that's not an African-American this is someone who might need a French interpreter or something else and don't know what's happening because there is a language access issue. I don't know if anyone else has comments.
I'm going to move us forward because we're, I think, running a little bit behind on time, and I want to get to discuss more of these scenarios. Can we move to the next slide, please? There we go. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. A lot of you are immigration attorneys in the audience, but for non-immigration attorneys, one of the takeaways here, one of the important takeaways here is that orders of protection can show up in immigration background checks. And this is because many states, and it really depends on the jurisdiction, but many states record that information for varying periods of time and share it with the FBI National Crime Information Center database. Yes, National Crime Information Center. And even after orders of protection expire, that information may remain in the system due to bureaucratic inertia. So it might take special effort to remove that information. Anyway, when immigration discovers this, it can trigger a lot of special inquiries or requests for evidence. So these sort of cross orders that happen that we've talked about a little bit already can trigger this additional scrutiny. They resulted maybe from additional scrutiny, and they will trigger additional scrutiny in the immigration system. Violations of orders of protection themselves may trigger grounds of removal. I have some listed here. There are other DV grounds of removal that if your family court system is like, some states like New York, some of the family court offenses also appear in the New York Penal Code. And so findings and convictions can trigger DV grounds of removal. There's a lot more to say about this, and I would really love for us to do additional training about this topic in particular. But I want to highlight some of these problems that come up in immigration where there is a family court history that is negative for the survivor. And discretion is always going to be a problem for immigration applications and for people who are not practicing immigration law. It can be surprising how much gets weighed as negative discretion in applications for people who are otherwise eligible for relief. I'll say that was inartful, but I will leave you with that, and we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So now we're here with Lourdes. She is a dark-skinned Black woman from Honduras. She has a VAWA self-petition pending based on severe physical and emotional abuse by her ex-husband, who is a U.S. citizen. He's currently seeking a civil order of protection against her, arguing that she's been violent with him and is seeking sole custody of their child. He argues that she lacks stable housing, is undocumented, and is neglectful, while he is financially stable and owns his own home. As an example of her neglect, he tells the court that she left their preteen son at a fast food restaurant by himself while she went to a job interview. You discuss this with her, and she says that the proprietor is a friend and that her son was using his daughter's computer to complete his homework. Oh, and thank you, Melissa, for adding that note in the chat. Civil protection orders are maintained. Thank you in that file. All right, I'll let you add more as we talk about this scenario. So looking at this, what are the implications of the ex-husband's accusations against Lourdes for immigration status concerns? What are the implications of obtaining an OP against her? How do you address the neglect and abuse accusations? That's a practice question. I'm curious to know what folks think about that. Please put your answers in the chat. And how might Lourdes's race, color, and ethnicity impact these proceedings? So maybe we can start from the top. What are the implications?
I'll just say he did a really great job of reframing all of his abuse and putting it on her. So that's really why it's important to understand intimate partner violence dynamics and just how very often abusive partners will use, like, right, he most likely prevented her from getting her documentation, and now he's using it against her, or he was somehow involved in the process and now he's using it against her. Saying she doesn't have stable housing. Wasn't she living with you, sir? And she's not anymore because of your abuse. So really making sure to have a full conversation about what his abusive tactics were and then how it's going to show up in your case.
Very good point.
Obviously, he's making the case that she's a neglectful mother, right? That's part of the basis for the protection order. His protection order petition will be that she was neglectful. And obviously, as her attorney, you need to have a discussion about the age of the child. Is the child mature? You need to ask about the friend. Is this a close friend? We culturally can have family that's friends, right? Some of us don't have biological family, but we have people that are as close. And you would want to know, is this that type of friend that maybe they share childcare? Maybe this is someone from her community. They share the same language. We live in the same place, something like that. And establish that this is a trusted, almost family member to her, that she didn't abandon the child. Did the two kids do homework together? Is this the same age child, or is the daughter whose computer the son is using is almost like a babysitter? Making the whole case about it's not abandonment, that people are entitled to use childcare to find employment. That is not a crime to utilize childcare. And she used someone she trusted in a safe public space. There was other people were there, all of those arguments. It's hard to argue housing. It is very hard to argue housing and protection order. And all of this is going to require a really good intake with Lourdes to see all of the realities of her life. And she needs a really good attorney because her ex is litigious.
And thank you for bringing out like how the same sort of set of facts will present differently in different narratives, depending on who's telling the story and what context they're providing, right? Yeah. So what do we want to avoid here? I think we want to avoid her getting a order of protection. We want to avoid a neglect finding. We might have to agree, make some agreements that are uncomfortable as far as visitation. We might want to look into and refer her to some resources around housing, and make sure also that we're in touch with her immigration attorney, right? So that they know what's going on.
And for my colleagues at Ujima, do you all think that that colorism is having an impact here at all?
I think the fact that, one, she's from Honduras, that she's a dark-skinned person, she most likely speaks with an accent, all of those things could absolutely play, or probably are playing, into how she's being looked at or how she's being perceived. Yeah, I absolutely
currently unemployed. She's currently unhoused. A lot of stereotypes are going to come into play. And it's really hard to quantify people's bias towards darker skin. You can say, yes, it probably comes into play. You can say that.
We also don't know the husband's racial and ethnic background. So there could be also a relational aspect too.
Yeah, because it's one thing if he's a lighter skin tone, that's a whole different scenario, but he could still be a darker skinned person. But the fact that he's a US citizen gives him more privileges in terms of being believed or being seen as more honest or being seen as more responsible.
Right.
I would also like to point out, since the husband has filed for protection order, I would want her to have advocacy and an attorney for the civil protection order hearing, and have that attorney also be in contact with her immigration attorney so they can work in concert together. But I think that it would behoove her to have an attorney for the civil protection order, and maybe even file a cross petition, because she is actually the abused person, not him. So then she might end up having a protection order against him, which could provide child support. It could provide housing, a lot of things that civil courts can actually order in protection orders. She could then get some relief that would help her economically and potentially with housing for herself and the child.
That's also true for in some states, they provide some additional housing benefits, or in some, I think there's some federal housing benefits also available for survivors whose VAWA petitions are pending.
Right.
Yes, I think that's right. If they have a prima facie determination, I think. Yeah.
Let's not go too far down that. But no, I think also Vilma notes here in the chat that the VAWA is pending, which does speak to prior abuse. Although I think the question about whether to raise that in this proceeding is potentially a difficult one, right? You don't want to necessarily introduce something that the husband's attorney can seek discovery of, I would imagine.
And that's why I would want the protection order attorney to work in concert with the immigration attorney, not each of them be siloed on their issues, because any of the moves made in either side can impact her life substantially.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on so we can get to the next couple of examples. Next slide, please. All right, we're talking about public charge. This slide basically says it all. We find that in light of some of this history we've been talking about, receipt of public benefits is highly stigmatized among low-income immigrants. However, and there's also a ton of fear around being deported or denied immigration status because of accepting public assistance to which they are actually eligible. So one thing we always train advocates on is that the scope of this ground is very narrow. As you can see, the current final rule codified previous immigration policy, which is favorable in this regard. And also that those granted survivor-based benefits, in purple here, you can see those granted survivor-based benefits are exempt from public charge. So that's something we really want people to remember. Next slide. Welfare fraud and immigration status. There are negative immigration consequences for immigrants found to have committed welfare or public benefits fraud. Kelly touched on the intersections of criminal and immigration law. So you might, you probably already know, I think considering the audience, probably already know that most grounds of removability require convictions, but some, including crimes involving moral turpitude, can be triggered also by admissions or findings of conduct that violate criminal laws, where there are proceedings that are on the record. As Milson noted earlier, you have statements made under oath that could also potentially trigger inquiries about admissions. In the welfare context, the conviction for fraud or perjury will trigger the CIMT ground if the amount of loss to the government exceeds $10,000 or a sentence of more than 1 year imposed. It is an aggravated felony. These have really severe impacts on immigration relief. It is as bad as it sounds. No special waivers are available for welfare fraud specifically, I don't think, although I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. Although the waivers that are available to UNT petitioners are available. And arguments can also be made under the categorical approach that a particular jurisdiction's law does not trigger removability. However, all of that said, the first step in any prosecution for welfare fraud is typically an investigation by the Public Benefits Agency and referral after a determination of fraud. These findings, I would imagine, can also be part of a criminal record or a criminal file, rather, even if a lesser offense is pled to or no conviction at all results. So we often see arrest records resulting in negative discretionary decisions, as we've said, even where no conviction resulted. So this makes it important for immigrants to contest accusations of welfare fraud, even at early stages of the investigation. Going to skip to the next slide now so we can talk about Diana. Thank you. Diana, I'm pronouncing it Diana, no, is a dark-skinned Black woman from Nigeria. She received state-funded supplemental needs benefits based on her low income before she received her U visa and EAD card. Assumed that she was considered Pru-Call under state law. Once she began working, she advised her benefits caseworker that she was working. Thanks, Kelly. And provided a copy of her pay stub. She continued to receive benefits, but took no further action. And now the welfare agency is investigating her for fraud. So why is the welfare agency alleging that Diana committed fraud? How might Diana's race, color, and ethnicity impact her experience of this investigation? And what are the possible consequences for Diana if the agency concludes that she committed fraud? I think we just talked about that a little bit. Let's talk about, so put your answers in the chat, please. Why you think they're alleging this? How might she defend herself against these accusations, these allegations? And let's tease apart some of the dynamics that are happening here. Yeah, Kelly, I agree. I think that we have to be aware that Diana, as a dark-skinned Black woman, might be subject to some of these negative stereotypes that we've been talking about, right? We don't know who her caseworker is, but I think we can say these are so infused in the systems that it's might even be just reflexive that there's a suspicion of fraud where someone's records don't match up with some kind of data system.
Someone had mentioned it before when we were talking about ethnicity, the fact that she's from Nigeria, which is commonly known as like a scam capital of the world in our community, is going to play a factor whether people are really understanding that it is or not, just simply because of how implicit bias works.
That's what I was thinking as well. That could also be a factor here and how she's being approached about this issue. What can we do as advocates to help her go through this investigation? Vilma says, hopefully she kept dates, names, facts of her visit with the caseworker. Yes, exactly. We can help recreate a timeline. We can draft an affidavit for her. We can talk to her about step by step what she did on what day and collect also copies of the materials that she presented. Did she sign in her name at the caseworker office? Excellent, excellent. We can corroborate the day that she said she went there to provide this material. That's a great idea. If we're working with her before she goes to her appointment and we know that she has a job now and that we've advised her about her obligations and she says, okay, I'm going off to visit my caseworker now. I'm going to bring her a copy of my pay stub. We can ask her to help her write a quick note maybe and have a copy made of her note plus the pay stub and ask them to stamp it as received.
That, or I would even go so far as to say email sometimes, maybe not in all circumstances, but to have a concrete paper trail that you can track back is really helpful because the case manager might have simply made a mistake and couldn't locate where the documents are, and still it's going to impact her case.
It's not uncommon for there to be overpayments. It's not uncommon at all. So if you can get to the point where the agency agrees that there was an overpayment, but that there's not enough evidence of some kind of fraud, then I think that's a good place to end up. And then you can work out a payment plan. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Yes, we have an excellent material also in our index that goes into this with a lot more detail. These are frequent factors impacting welfare fraud allegations against non-citizens. Inadequate language access is a huge problem, as we know, throughout the system. Okay, let's hit the next slide. And this, I was actually talking, we're going to be talking about removal proceedings, and this is our last scenario. Let's go straight into the case, the example. Next slide. All right, Marguerite, a dark-skinned Black woman from Cameroon, is testifying in immigration court in favor of her application for VAWA cancellation before a white male immigration judge. As she testifies about her husband's efforts to control her with threats and intimidation, the IJ interjects to say, "You look like a strong woman. Why did you stay with this man?" Marguerite begins to shut down and gives shorter answers, looking away from the judge. Later, the IJ says that the photos submitted by counsel don't clearly show bruises on Marguerite and suggests that the medical records she submitted were not credible because the doctor was not present to testify on her behalf. What's going on here? How does race and color affect these proceedings? Please weigh in the chat. I think this is some stuff that we've talked about in the last couple of hours. Are there any stereotypes or negative narratives that you think are coming into play here?
Really, the immigration judge is victim blaming with the "why did you stay with this man?" But you can also see some of what Ayana was talking about earlier, the stereotype of dark-skinned Black Cameroonian Marguerite is too strong to be a victim of gender-based violence. There's no understanding by the judge. That has nothing to do with whether or not you're a victim. People can be a victim of any race and any size and anything. And it's almost like there's not grace given to Black women to be anything besides perceived so strong. And if you're strong, you can't be a victim. Obviously, if you hear the administrative judge saying these things to your client and then your client begins to shut down, you're going to have to do something because your client is shutting down and the judge has shown you that they are victim blaming and showing their real bias here. They also looking at the photos and saying that they don't clearly show the bruises. There's a lot here to unpack with the judge showing you that they don't really understand how bruises can be seen on victims who have melanated skin. You're going to have to argue the credibility of the medical records, notwithstanding the doctor not being present to testify. Things like that are going to have to happen. But at the point where the judge asks your client, "Why did you stay with this man?" it might be time for a brief recess to just meet with your client and let them know what's going on and make sure that they understand that you're there to support them and that things might actually go a little rough. I think that you can actually talk to survivors and tell them this judge is not the best. And people understand, people can accept bad news. It's better than letting people get victimized by the system. It's better than just standing there and letting your client get victimized. I think that people would appreciate the truth and having it told by their attorney to them in a very brief moment.
Is there anything that you might try to put on the record?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
No,
I'm worried about my client for a minute, but yeah.
I love what you said, and I was thinking just that. But I know a lot of folks are always wondering, like, how can I address this problem with the judge? Yeah,
and even that, your client might not understand what you're doing, right? You still might have to. This is when we get into what the language of the law is and people understanding what's happening. People might not understand when you're trying to make a record and what the point of that record is. But yes, you are going to want to try and get things on the record because and this wouldn't even just be an immigration court. This could be if it's a civil protection order. If the judge is showing that much bias and things like that, you're going to want to make a record. You want to substantiate as much as you can. You're going to want to object where you can to negate those comments and also show and focus the judge on the law and then the facts versus the bias towards a strong woman and victim blaming of why did you stay. As much as you can without pissing off the judge, you're going to want to try and make statements that will be on the record, because obviously the attorneys, you don't want to piss off the judge either, because then
Right.
it's going to go even worse. It's a fine line between being assertive to your client and for their needs and espousing their legal position and really making the judge so angry that now you're sanctioned as the attorney. I don't know if anybody else, but I know we're getting low on time, so I'll mute.
No, I know it. Like, I thank you for weighing in on that. And I agree. It shows that these facts show that she's shutting down at his tone. And so also using that time of a short break to encourage her to relay her experiences for the record, to ignore him as best she can, to answer your questions, assuming that you're able to get through a direct focus on you. Things like that. And then to the degree that you have the information and can share it with the court, maybe putting on the record that the medical records maybe contain narrative, contemporaneous narrative that show her injuries, that corroborate her injuries, regardless of what he thinks about the pictures. And also as counsel for someone who is darker skinned, you need to also be aware of the way that photos of bruises on dark skin appear, and make sure that your copies or whatever you're submitting to the court are sufficient to demonstrate what you're trying to show, which are injuries. So making sure that the right light is being used to document injuries, making sure that maybe DVSA advocates or others can also provide contemporaneous narratives about the violence. And I know we're 5 minutes. So let's go to the next slide. We're just going to talk very quickly about VAWA cancellation. This is what Marguerite was trying to establish before that judge. As you can see, she can make her case by showing extreme cruelty. Why she is there, VAWA cancellation is available to folks who, for whom VAWA self-petitioning is not, and we could talk more about that another time. But particularly a classic example of people who divorced longer than 2 years prior can apply for VAWA cancellation in immigration court. Let's go to the next slide. Again, we talked about some of this just now, some practical tips for representing Black immigrant survivors and all immigrant survivors, but as Millicent and I were just saying, build a strong record, build documentation and a hearing transcript that can withstand an IJ's bias. A lot of you put really good things in the comments in the chat here also when we were talking about that case. Anticipate greater scrutiny and negative inferences. Just assume that you have to document the hell out of things. Draw attention to resources contextualizing systemic isolation, biases, and criminalization of Black immigrants included in your waiver applications and your evidence packets. Draw attention to it in court where needed. Listen to your clients and partner with them to present their cases. I wonder if anyone has anything else to add in our last few minutes. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Here we are. This is our last slide. Does anyone have any questions? Train the judges. Yes, Vilma, train the judges. Yes. Ayana, you should train all the judges. Absolutely. All the
We would love to train all the judges. They just have to show up. So if you know some judges, send them for training and say, we need you to take it back to your friend judges and tell everyone.
Excellent. Excellent. These are our email addresses. You should reach out to any of us if you have questions about today's presentation. You can also reach out to Kelly for technical assistance. if you're an OVW grantee. She is available to answer any technical immigration questions and also strategic questions when navigating some of this material in real life. And did I miss anything, Kelly? Is there anything we should add at last?
I don't think so. We did have one question in the Q&A box. Do you have suggestions on how to talk to clients about how you think their race is being perceived by the courts or systems, especially if you're not the same race as your clients?
Susanna, great question.
That is
That's
a
a
great
great
question.
question. And I think that we have 1 minute. So that would be the kind of thing, please reach out for some TA, because I think that is important to acknowledge that you may not be the same race or ethnicity as your client does not mean you cannot provide good coverage and also provide an honest framework about what's happening when you're in court with them, when you see things that are happening. So please reach out to us, because I know that we only have until 4 o'clock and I'm looking and it's 4 o'clock now. But we're happy to help you with that.
Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. And the evaluation will pop up on your screen at the end of the webinar. So please fill it out. We do read it and use it to plan our future trainings. Thank you, everyone.